Everyone at the Greasy Spoon knew her simply as Marnie, the prickly, efficient, no-nonsense waitress who had been slinging hash browns and pouring bottomless coffee for longer than most could remember. She was a fixture, as much a part of the diner as the cracked vinyl booths and the perpetually sticky counter. Her past was a blank slate, her future seemingly written in the daily specials. The regulars thought they knew everything about her. Her disdain for small talk, her incredible memory for orders, the way she'd shield her left forearm with her sleeve even on the hottest days. They had their theories, a bad burn, maybe, or an old scar. They were wrong. The truth was hidden in plain sight, under crisp white cotton, waiting for a single, chaotic moment to unravel the carefully constructed life of a woman who wasn't a waitress at all. It all changed the day a drunk customer grabbed her wrist, the sleeve tore back, and the intricate, impossible tattoo was revealed to the stunned morning crowd. The bell above the door of the Greasy Spoon jangled with a tired, tinny sound, a noise Marnie had heard roughly 1,000,000 times. Dawn was just a suggestion on the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, but the diner was already humming. Truckers, night shift workers, and a few bleary-eyed souls seeking solace in grease and caffeine filled the booths. The air was thick with the scent of sizzling bacon, cheap coffee, and lemon-scented disinfectant. Marnie moved through the chaos with a silent, practiced grace. Her sneakers, worn soft, made no sound on the scuffed linoleum. Her hands, deft, strong, and marked with small burns from the grill, were a blur, refilling a cup without spilling a drop, sliding a plate of eggs, and toast perfectly before a customer, making change from her apron without looking. She was in her late 50s, her hair a practical, steely gray bob tucked behind her ears. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing, but offered little warmth. She spoke in a shorthand the regulars understood. "Usual, Hank." A grunt was confirmation. "Burnt 2 creams, Lou." A nod. To them, she was just Marnie. Reliable, sharp-tongued when needed, a ghost in a polyester uniform who kept their world running one breakfast plate at a time. They didn't know where she lived, if she had family, or what she did on Sundays. She preferred it that way. Her life was a series of routines. Work, a small apartment a bus ride away, grocery shopping on Thursday nights, and the careful maintenance of the walls she had built around herself. A key part of that maintenance was the long-sleeved uniform shirt, always buttoned at the wrist, even in the stifling summer heat when the ancient air conditioner wheezed pathetically. When curious newcomers asked, "Aren't you hot in those sleeves, honey?" she'd level them with a stare that could freeze coffee and reply, "I manage." The regulars had learned not to ask. They assumed it was a quirk, or perhaps a religious thing, though Marnie didn't seem the type for religion. The morning the world shifted started like any other. Marnie was clearing a table near the window when a group of rowdy young men spilled in, loud and still buzzing from a night out. They were obnoxious, but harmless, ordering large platters of everything. Marnie served them with her typical detached efficiency, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. The trouble started with one of them, a lanky guy with a loud laugh named Chad. He'd had one too many and was now nursing a monumental hangover and a belligerent attitude. When Marnie placed his milkshake down, he complained it was too thin. She offered to have the cook add more ice cream. He grabbed her wrist as she turned to go. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he slurred, his grip tightening. A flicker of something dangerous, something old and coiled, flashed in Marnie's eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by cold fury. "Let go." The words were quiet, but carried the weight of granite. He didn't. He tugged, playfully at first, then harder as his friends laughed. "Small, lighten up, goma." In the struggle, his ring, a bulky, cheap thing, caught on the cuff of her sleeve. There was a sharp rip of tearing cotton. The sound was small, but in Marnie's ears, it was a thunderclap. Time seemed to slow. She yanked her arm back, but it was too late. The sleeve tore open from wrist to elbow, revealing not pale, plain skin, but a breathtaking tapestry of ink. It wasn't a simple rose or a generic tribal band. It was a masterpiece. A complex, hyper-realistic scene in vibrant color. A majestic, snow-capped mountain range she knew intimately. The Hindu Kush, blending seamlessly into a detailed, technical schematic of a jet engine. Woven through it were lines of elegant, cryptic script in Pashto and Russian, and a single stark Latin phrase, ex cineribus. From the ashes. Below it, nestled near the delicate skin of her inner wrist, was a small, stylized insignia. An owl holding a lightning bolt, a symbol known to a very select, very secretive few in the world. The diner fell silent. The sizzle from the grill was suddenly deafening. Every eye in the room was locked on her forearm. Chad dropped her arm as if scalded, his hangover-pale face going slack with shock. Hank, the retired mechanic, stared, his fork suspended mid-air. Lou, the newspaper editor, adjusted his glasses, his journalist's mind whirring. Marnie didn't look at them. She looked at her own revealed skin, at the history etched there she had tried so hard to bury. A wave of nausea, cold and sharp, washed over her. 30 years of careful anonymity, of hiding in the most ordinary of places, torn away by a drunk kid's ring. Without a word, she turned and walked stiffly into the back, past the stunned cook and into the small, cluttered storage room. She leaned against a shelf of canned tomatoes, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The familiar, dusty smell of the room was suddenly replaced in her mind by the acrid scent of jet fuel, cold, thin air of high altitude, and the electric tension of a secured command center. She closed her eyes, but the memories, now unleashed, pressed in like ghosts. She was no longer Marnie the waitress. She was Marina Volkov, once the youngest and most brilliant aviation engineer in the Soviet Union's Experimental Design Bureau, later a ghost in the machine, a stolen asset, a woman who had helped shape the wings of the Cold War, and then vanished from the face of the earth. The tattoo was not decoration. It was a testament, a dangerous ledger of her mind, her loyalties, her betrayals. And now it was exposed. The silence in the diner lingered for a full minute after the storage room door swung shut behind Marnie. Then a low buzz of conversation erupted, frantic and incredulous. "Did you see that?" One of Chad's friends whispered, all traces of laughter gone. Hank, the mechanic, finally put his fork down. "That weren't no jailhouse ink," he muttered to Lou. That was something else. Like one of them blueprints, but prettier. And them writings, Lou, his editor's brain now in overdrive, was already sketching the design on a napkin. The owl and lightning bolt. He'd seen that before in an old archive file during a brief stint covering military procurement years ago. It was connected to a black project, something so buried it was almost a myth. The Ibis Initiative, they called it. He'd assumed it was legend. In the storage room, Marnie's panic was a living thing, clawing at her throat. But decades of training, a different kind of training, reasserted itself. Panic got you killed. Assessment. Action. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting of dust and dried onions. She couldn't run. Running would confirm everything. It would paint a target on her back for anyone who might be looking, even now. She looked at the torn sleeve. The fabric was ruined. With steady hands that belied the storm inside, she rummaged in a box of lost and found items, pulling out an old, gray cardigan. It was stretched and pilled, but it would cover the arm. She put it on, buttoning it firmly. She looked at herself in the small, grimy mirror by the first aid kit. Just Marnie again. Older, tired, wearing a ratty sweater. She smoothed her hair, wooled the ice back in her veins, and pushed the door open. The diner's conversation died a second time. All eyes were on her. She ignored them, walking straight to the table of young men. Chad flinched. "Your milkshake," she said, her voice eerily calm, devoid of its usual sharpness. It was a flat, controlled tone that seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "Would you like more ice cream, or will the current consistency be sufficient?" It's fine," Chad stammered. "Good." She turned her winter gaze on the rest of the table. "The check will be at the register when you're ready." She walked away, not to the safety of the back, but into the heart of the diner, refilling coffees, clearing plates. It was a performance of normalcy, a daring act of defiance. See? Nothing to look at. Just a waitress in an ugly sweater. But the spell was broken. The regulars watched her with new eyes. They saw the economy of her movement not as weariness, but as precision. They saw the way she scanned the room, not for empty cups, but for exits, for threats. The way she held a coffee pot like she knew its exact weight and balance. Old fragments of conversation, once meaningless, now took on new significance. She'd once fixed the stubborn industrial fan on the ceiling with a paperclip and a muttered comment about inadequate torque. She corrected a customer's offhand comment about MiG aircraft with a technical detail so specific it had shut him up. Lou waited until the lunch rush had dwindled. He slid onto a counter stool as Marnie wiped it down. "Rough morning, Marnie." She didn't look up. "They're all rough, Lou. That was quite a piece of art on your arm." Her wiping slowed for a fraction of a second. A youthful mistake. Covered it up for a reason. Didn't look like a mistake. Looked like a story. The Hindu Kush. And that phrase, ex cineribus, from the ashes. Heavy stuff for a young girl from... Where was it you said you were from again? She met his eyes then. The look was a fortress wall, impenetrable and cold. "I didn't." She threw the rag into a bin. "You need a refill?" The first crack in her carefully maintained world appeared that evening. As she walked to her bus stop, a black SUV with government plates rolled past, moving slowly. It didn't stop, but the message was received. Someone had already talked. Maybe one of Chad's friends had a relative in the Air Force. Maybe Lou had made a phone call. The net, dormant for decades, was twitching. Back in her sparse, neat apartment, devoid of photographs, of personal effects, Marnie sat at her small kitchen table. She rolled up the cardigan sleeve and stared at the tattoo. Her fingers traced the lines of the mountain peaks. She was 24 again, standing on a windswept tarmac in a remote Soviet republic, watching a prototype of a supersonic jet she had helped design scream into the sky. The pride, the fervor. Then came the disillusionment, the fear, the impossible choice presented in a smoky room by men speaking in American accents. They hadn't just wanted her knowledge. They had wanted her mind, her allegiance. The tattoo had been a later addition, a bitter, beautiful rebellion inked by a sympathetic artist in a safe house in Berlin, a way to carry her truth on her skin when she could speak none of it aloud. The owl and lightning bolt, her passport out of one life and into a gilded cage of another. She had been a prized asset, debriefed for years, her knowledge siphoned and used. And then, deemed less critical in a new world order, she had been gently, quietly retired. Given a new name, a simple identity, and a directive, disappear. Don't draw attention. So she had chosen the most invisible life she could imagine. The greasy spoon. Now, the attention was drawn. She knew how these things worked. The SUV was a probe. There would be questions, a routine review of her status. Her peaceful oblivion was over. But as the initial fear receded, something else stirred in Marnie's chest. It wasn't just fear. It was a long-forgotten spark of anger. She had given up everything, her country, her name, her life's work, for a promise of safety that had just been torn like a sleeve. She was tired of hiding. The tattoo was out. Let them see it. Let them remember. The black SUV became a fixture. It was never there when she looked directly, but she felt its presence like a change in barometric pressure. It would be parked down the street from the diner, or idling near her apartment building at night. They were letting her know she was seen. Marnie's response was to become more visibly Marnie. She was slightly louder, slightly more sarcastic with the customers, leaning into the caricature of the gruff waitress. It was her armor. Meanwhile, the story, as such stories do in small communities, had taken on a life of its own. At the diner, Hank was now convinced she was a retired NASA engineer. Chad, sober and mortified, told his friends she was definitely a former spy, a theory that gained traction at the local community college. Lou, the editor, was digging deeper, his old contacts in defense reporting suddenly, returning his calls with a wary curiosity. The catalyst came from an unexpected direction. A young woman named Chloe started coming in. She was an art student, a regular with sketchbook in hand, who had been there the morning of the reveal. She'd seen the tattoo not as a military secret, but as a breathtaking piece of narrative art. One afternoon, she timidly approached Marnie at the counter. "I'm sorry to bother you, Marnie," Chloe said, her voice soft. "But what happened the other day, I couldn't help but see your tattoo. I've never seen ink like that." The composition, the technical detail, merged with the natural landscape. It's genius. Who was the artist? Marnie, polishing a glass, stopped. In all the fear and speculation, no one had asked about the artistry. They saw a code, a blueprint, a flag. This girl saw creation. For the first time, the wall around Marnie didn't just crack, a small gate opened. "He's gone," Marnie said, her voice quieter than usual. "A long time ago. It tells a story, doesn't it?" Chloe pressed, not pushing, just observing. "It feels like a memorial and a promise." Ex generibus. Marnie looked at the girl's earnest face, free of malice or agenda. "It's a record," she said finally, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "Of things built and things broken." That small exchange changed the atmosphere. Chloe began sitting at the counter more often, sketching not the diner, but abstract designs inspired by what she'd glimpsed, geometric patterns blending into organic forms. She didn't ask more questions, but her quiet, respectful fascination created a space around Marnie that felt different. The regulars, taking their cue from Chloe, began to treat the incident not as a scandal, but as a mystery belonging to Marnie alone. Their curiosity softened into a protective respect. But the outside world was not so kind. 1 week after the reveal, 2 men in somber suits walked into the Greasy Spoon. They didn't look like customers. They moved with a synchronized, purposeful grace and sat in Marnie's section. Her blood ran cold. She knew their type. Administration. Oversight. She walked over, order pad in hand. "What can I get you?" The older of the two, a man with a closely shaved head and eyes like stone, offered a thin smile. "Coffee. Black. And a few minutes of your time, Marina." The name, spoken so casually in the middle of her diner, was a physical blow. "My name is Marnie," she said, her voice flat. "Of course. We're from the Department of Administrative Review. Just a routine follow-up on personnel associated with legacy projects." He slid a business card across the formica. It was blank except for a phone number. "We should talk. Somewhere quieter, to ensure your continued comfort." It was a threat wrapped in bureaucracy. "Play along, where your peaceful retirement ends." "I'm working," she said. "We'll wait." And they did. They sat for 2 hours, drinking black coffee, a silent, oppressive presence. The diner grew quiet again. The message was clear to everyone. Marnie was connected to something big. Where a shift ended, she had no choice. She walked out with them. The regulars watched, helpless, as she was escorted not to a car, but to a nondescript sedan a block away. They didn't take her to an office. They drove to a city park and sat on a bench. The interview was a cold reiteration of her obligations. Silence, obscurity, gratitude for the life she'd been given. They questioned her about the tattoo's exposure, treating it as a potential security breach. Did she show it intentionally? Had she been communicating? "A drunk kid tore my sleeve," she stated, each word a chip of ice. "It was an accident. I have maintained my cover, as agreed. I am no one. I serve meals." The stone-eyed man studied her. "That tattoo makes you someone. It raises questions. Questions require answers, and answers create ripples. We don't like ripples, Marina. Consider this a warning. We are watching, and your current employment may no longer be conducive to a low-profile environment." They left her on the bench. The meaning was clear. You need to disappear again. Leave the diner. Leave this town. Walking home, a cold fury solidified within Marnie. This was her life. This boring, simple, hard-won life. They had given it to her like a gift, and now they thought they could just take it back because a sleeve tore? She thought of Chloe seeing art in her pain. She thought of Hank's respectful nod, of Lou's intelligent, unasked questions. She had built something here, not a life of importance, but a life of connection, however faint. It was hers. She wouldn't run. Not this time. The tattoo was out. Let be a flag. Not of a country, but of a person. She was Marina, who had designed wings for Titans. She was Marnie, who made the best coffee on this side of town. They would have to deal with both. Defiance, Marnie discovered, was a lonely fuel. It burned bright, but provided little warmth. The suits did not return, but their shadow remained. She felt watched constantly. The diner's owner, a kindly but nervous man named Al, pulled her aside after a few days. Marnie, I got a visit from some gentlemen, from the government. They suggested, strongly, that I might want to consider restructuring my staff. For the safety of the establishment. He couldn't meet her eyes. She understood. The greasy spoon was his life's work. He couldn't fight the vague, ominous pressure they exerted. I'll finish out the week, Al, she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. The anger had settled into a hard, determined core. The regulars, sensing the impending loss, rallied in their own quiet way. Hank started a petition to keep Marnie, getting every trucker and shift worker to sign. Lou wrote a carefully worded editorial for the local paper about community pillars and unexplained government overreach, never naming names but making the situation clear. Chloe organized a small art appreciation day at the diner, inviting her classmates, subtly shifting the narrative around Marnie from mysterious suspect to local treasure with a fascinating past. It was touching, but Marnie knew it was a battle they couldn't win against the faceless machinery that had found her. She began to quietly prepare to leave, her heart a lead weight. She would go further away, maybe up north, find another nowhere town. The thought exhausted her. The turning point arrived in the form of an unassuming man in his 70s. He came in on a Thursday afternoon, dressed in a worn bomber jacket and a cap. He sat at the counter and ordered pie and coffee. He had kind, crinkled eyes that held a sharp intelligence. He watched Marnie move for a long time. When she brought his pie, he spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. That's a MiG 25 schematic in the upper quadrant, isn't it? The intake design is unmistakable, but the blending into the Karakoram range that's inspired. Marnie froze. This wasn't a bureaucrat. This was a peer, an old ghost like her. She said nothing, just stared. He smiled, a sad, understanding smile. I knew a designer once, a genius from the McCoy Bureau. She had a theory about variable geometry wings for high-altitude reconnaissance that was decades ahead of its time. They said she defected. They said a lot of things. He took a bite of pie. Name's Frank. I flew cargo. A lot of different cargo to a lot of interesting places for a lot of interesting people. A delivery man. A courier. He'd been part of the same shadowy world. He recognized the owl and lightning bolt because he'd seen it on documents he'd transported. He wasn't here to threaten her. He was, in his way, paying respects. They're pushing me out, Frank, she heard herself say, the words surprising her. I know, he said simply. They do that. They use you up, then they want you to vanish. Makes for a cleaner history book. He pushed his plate away. But sometimes the pages refuse to stay blank. That tattoo of yours, it's a page. A pretty damn powerful one. What am I supposed to do? Fight the Pentagon? No, Frank chuckled. You remind them you exist. On your terms. You're not Marina the defector anymore. You're not Marnie the waitress they can shush away. You're the woman with the story on her arm. Stories have power, especially true ones. He left her a phone number scribbled on a napkin next to his tip. I know some people, historians, not spooks, the kind who want the real story before the last of us are gone. They protect their source. Think about it. That night, Marnie didn't pack. She sat at her kitchen table with Frank's napkin. She thought about history being written by the victors, by the administrators in suits. Her work, her sacrifices, the terrible beauty of the machines she helped create, all reduced to classified dust. And for what? To be forced out of a diner job 30 years later? A fierce, clear resolve crystallized within her. She would not run. She would not fade. If they want to make her leave the greasy spoon, she would make her exit mean something. She went to see Lou. "You want the story?" she asked, standing in the doorway of the newspaper office. "The real one." Lou, stunned, just nodded. "Then we talk. But we do it my way. You record it. You get it verified where you can. And you publish it, all of it, including the tattoo, when I say so. Not before." It was the beginning of a week-long confession. In Lou's small office, with a digital recorder between them, Marnie slowly, painstakingly, became Marina again. She spoke of the brilliant, oppressive world of Soviet engineering, of the thrill of solving impossible problems, of the creeping fear of the KGB, of the harrowing escape, of the cold welcome in the West where she was both asset and prisoner. She explained the tattoo, each element. The mountains she saw from the test facility, the engine that was her masterpiece, the scripts that were fragments of poems from her homeland, and from the Russian engineers she admired and betrayed, the Latin phrase she chose for herself. And the owl, wisdom, seeing in darkness, with the lightning bolt of sudden, shocking power. The insignia of the project that gave her a new name and a hollow life. Lou listened, transfixed, his journalist's mind reeling at the magnitude of it. He had the story of a lifetime, but it was also a profound, human tragedy of a brilliant mind caught between empires. "What now, Marnie?" he asked when the final recording was done. "Now," she said, a new light in her winter eyes, "I serve my last meals. And then we see how they like their history served." The air in the greasy spoon on Marnie's last scheduled day was thick with a bittersweet tension. It wasn't a secret. Al had posted the new schedule. The regulars filled every booth and stool, not for a protest, but for a silent vigil. They came for one last coffee, one last plate of eggs, served by her steady hands. Chloe was there, sketching. Hank and Lou sat together, saying little. Marnie worked her shift with a serene focus she hadn't possessed in weeks. The fear was gone, burned away by purpose. She smiled more, small, genuine smiles that startled people. She called everyone by name. It was a farewell, but it felt like a commencement. As the afternoon lull set in, the expected shadow fell. The two suits entered again, this time with a third man, younger, carrying a briefcase. The stone-eyed man looked around at the full diner with faint disapproval. He approached the counter where Marnie was totaling a check. "Your shift ends at 3, correct?" he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We have arranged transport. Your belongings from your apartment have been packed. It's time to go." A hush fell over the diner. Every eye was on the exchange. Marnie put down her pen. She looked at him, then, slowly, deliberately, began to unbutton the cuff of her sweater. Then the other. The regulars held their breath. She pulled the sweater off, revealing the long-sleeved uniform shirt beneath, the torn left sleeve now visibly mended with a neat, almost surgical stitch. She then, with a calm that seemed to amplify the silence, began to roll up that mended sleeve past her forearm, all the way to her elbow. The tattoo was fully exposed, a stunning mural of a past life. The diner's fluorescent light glinted off the intricate inks. "My name," Marnie said, her voice clear and carrying, "is Marina Alexandrovna Volkov. I designed the guidance system for the Sokol prototype. I perfected the high-compression turbine blades that gave the MiG-31 its edge. My work is in museums and in graveyards of the Cold War. I left everything. I gave everything. And for 30 years, I have served coffee and eggs in this diner, and I have been content." She looked at the stunned suits, then at her customers, her community. "You want me to disappear again? To be quiet? But this," she gestured her arm, "is not quiet. It is my service record. It is my confession and my pride. And this," she gestured around the diner, "is my home. You could take me out of it, but you do not get to erase me." The younger man with the briefcase looked alarmed. The stone-eyed agent's face was granite. "This is highly irresponsible. A breach of what?" Lou's voice cut through from his booth. He stood up, holding a thick manila envelope. "Of a promise to let a woman be forgotten? I have her story. All of it. verified where possible. Transcripts, recordings. It's being copied to several law firms, historical archives, and major news outlets as we speak with a release trigger. You escort her out against her will, it gets published tomorrow. You leave her in peace, we talk. It was a bluff, but a powerful one. Marnie hadn't authorized immediate release, but Lou played his hand with the confidence of a man holding four aces. The suits were not prepared for this. They were administrators used to dealing with ghosts who wanted to stay ghosts. They were not equipped for a ghost who demanded to be seen, backed by a town and a journalist. A silent battle waged in the agent's eyes. The cost-benefit analysis of making a scene, of a potential scandal, of a brilliant, wrong scientist story hitting the mainstream versus letting one old waitress stay in her diner. Your continued discretion is required, the agent finally said, his voice tight. My discretion, Marnie said, rolling her sleeve back down with finality, is a choice, not an order. I choose to stay. I choose to serve meals. And sometimes I choose to talk about the mountains. The suits left. The diner erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective, deep exhalation, followed by the clinking of coffee cups and murmurs of solidarity. Hank slapped the counter. Chloe beamed. Al, from the kitchen doorway, wiped his eyes with his apron. Marnie finished her shift. She wasn't fired. The black SUV didn't return. A new, unspoken agreement was in place. She was allowed to exist as herself in the open secret of her own life. Weeks later, a letter arrived at the diner, addressed to Marnie. It was from a prestigious aeronautical history foundation, inviting her, as Marina Volkov, to consult on a project to archive Cold War technological history. They offered a generous fee and total control over her anonymity. Frank, the old courier, had made his call. Marnie didn't leave the greasy spoon. She cut her hours slightly. 2 days a week. She takes the bus to the nearby university where the foundation set up a discreet office. She talks to historians, her mind sharp as a scalpel, explaining the designs that once ruled the skies. She is paid not for secrets, but for truth. On the other days, she is at the diner, in her mended sleeve. The regulars know. Sometimes a curious outsider will come in, having heard a rumor. They'll stare, hoping for a glimpse. They'll see just a waitress. But if they're kind, if they listen, and if the light is right, they might see the faint outline of mountains and machinery beneath the cotton, and understand that some stories aren't told. They're lived one cup of coffee, one remembered detail, one peaceful day at a time. She serves meals, and that, finally, is what she is known for, a woman who fed people both with food and, when the time was right, with a long-hidden truth that was far more nourishing. This response is AI-generated and, for reference purposes only,